Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Robert Winters, and today is October 15th. Is that the Ides of October? Something like that. Beware, beware. Um, anyway, we blew off the show a couple of weeks ago, just had too many things to do. So we're just going to pick it up today and recount a few of the things that have gone on in the interim and maybe a few other things here and there. So I think without further ado, I'd like to just first say, on the last time we did a program, I was sort of touting this get together that was put together with Mayor Simmons. It's called and produced by Larry Ward and his wife Mitsuko, my neighbors. It was called Mosaic, and it was really honoring five individuals, and in particular, Marvin Gilmore for his 100th birthday. So I just wanted to at least start off just by mentioning that it was actually quite successful. It was, I think it's fair to say it was a pretty much a packed house at the Brattle Theater. And rarely is it the case that when you have a packed house at the Brattle Theater where I actually know like three-quarters of the people in the room. So it was very much like a real reunion. And I'll just say a few quick things about it, which is I think fair to say the featured guest was Marvin Gilmore, who some of you may know as the proprietor of the Western Front, but he's been involved in many other things, and he's quite the entrepreneur. But also honored was Artis Spears, who not only run the A.J. Spears Funeral Home, which is an absolutely essential resource for a lot of African American residents of Cambridge over the many years. Um, and Artis also served on the Cambridge Election Commission for quite a long time. Uh, Also honored was my friend Glenn Kuchar, former member of the Cambridge School Committee and current executive director of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, and a good friend, and the originator of the original Cambridge Inside Out quite a few years ago. Um, Also featured was Tim Toomey, former city councilor and state representative, and also Michael Sullivan, former city councilor, former mayor, and current uh, clerk of courts for Middlesex County. Anyway, it was a great time, great get together, good food, finger food mainly, and just really a good time all around. So that was actually on September 20th. I'm only mentioning that because I had sort of touted it at the last time we did a program, which I believe was on, when was it? That was actually September 17th. So now a few other things that happened in addition to that rather delightful event was, as we all know, we lost one of our city councilors, Joan Pickett, in the last day of August. And, the council, certainly made wonderful comments, heartfelt comments at the subsequent city council meeting, the first meeting in September. But also, when we last did the program, Cathie Zusy had not yet been elected in the vacancy recount. So I just sort of want to point out that that actually happened on September 19th, as scheduled, and absolutely not a single change from the detailed results that I had mentioned. How could it be really? We're using the same data and the same software. So anyway, so congratulations to Cathie Zusy, was officially sworn in at the September 23rd City Council meeting at the very beginning of the meeting, as is required under the Cambridge Charter. Now, there's something else I did want to mention, though, and I think I kind of advertised it a little bit when we last were doing the show. It was a celebration was organized primarily by the mayor. Really in doing it on behalf of the whole city council because Joan Pickett was a Cambridge city councilor. So on Saturday, September 28th, there was a burial and a service in New Hampshire earlier in the day, but later on, family members, Joan Pickett's family members, came down to Cambridge. Um, Most of whom, really all of whom I had never met, plus a lot of really longtime friends. And there was this gathering in the Sullivan Chamber, where people, there was poetry read, there was a lot of commentary from friends and relatives. I spoke at it as well. Wasn't planning to, but I kind of was moved to do so. And I'll just sort of mention, at the event there were these sort of commemorative cards honoring Joan Pickett, and which were really quite good. And there were all these little things that were like puzzle pieces, that sure somebody put this together very, very nicely. And it was really just a delightful get together. I mean, some of the things that I stated, I mean, I also wanted to mention the practical matter, which was that, Joan Pickett was really the perfect person for the time as Cambridge is entering some somewhat more challenging fiscal times, with declining commercial property values, not so much yet, but wait till next year is likely to be an even bigger drop, largely due to high vacancy rates. Um, as meanwhile as the Cambridge residential values are continuing to rise. So what this means is there's going to be a shift. There already is a shift happening of the tax burden onto the residential sector. So Joan, really more so than anyone else on the city council, had a real background in finance and municipal finance in particular. So she was almost like she was made for the job at the right time. And her passing really, really was a loss, not only because on a in personal terms, but also practical terms in terms of the functioning of city council. So one of the things I did was I sort of essentially challenged the rest of the city councilors to step up and hone their skills in municipal finance in order to prepare for the times ahead. Talk more about that in a minute because there was a tax rate hearing a couple of weeks ago, or actually a week ago, and where some of the predictions that I've been making for some time are starting to come true. So anyway, so that was a particularly moving event. I also, one of the things I'll say is, it's often true when people I know have passed away, the people who I think I knew, I find out so much more about them. And I think I may have made some comment to the effect that, maybe we all ought to just get to know each other a little bit better while we're all still here. Because rather than find out these and discover all these amazing, amazing things about people after they're gone, you know. But you could really tell that Joan had made quite an impression with some of her colleagues who were tearful and very sincere in the depth of their loss to someone who had become a really valued colleague. Now, so Cathie Zusy was elected on September 19th to fill the vacancy and was sworn in on September 23rd. I think I think she's hit the ground running. She's proving herself to be a quick study and is I think she reads up and researches a lot prior to every meeting. And I know when I make my kind of snarky comments, and not always snarky, but actually I try to be substantial as well. In advance of city council meetings, many of the councilors, maybe all of them, actually read what I write. And it's really delightful when some of the city councilors will then, as part of their commentary during a meeting, actually address some of the points that I've made and other people have made. Certainly when people make comments during public comment, it's often the case that at least one or two of the city councilors will address the concerns expressed by people. But anyway, I was very, very delighted to see new councilor Zusy, really, really filling out the role pretty well so far. So again, this whole city council this year has been such an improvement over the prior one, just in terms of collegiality, more of a work ethic, matter of just sort of getting things done rather than just performance art. So, I'm I'm hopeful, even with the loss of Joan, that we're going to be in good shape. You know, don't please don't prove me wrong. All right. Now, another thing that was, I'm just sort of recounting, things that I participated in the interim. One of the things that I like to do every spring and fall, though I believe I missed the last one, was the Cambridge Bicycle Committee. I believe it's they're the organizers. They put together a bike ride, a group bike ride. So one in the spring, one in the fall. And apparently the one in the fall is not specifically thematic. It's just follows the general shape of the city, which is, if you haven't noticed on a map, Cambridge is kind of shaped like a bow tie, with the knot right there at Harvard Square. So we basically, hit the northwest part of the city. Actually, this time I believe we started out going east down Cambridge Street, wrapped around through, came back around. I actually went through North Point, and it's amazing to me just how much change there is. It's like every time I go there, it's like spectacularly different than the previous time. But then we sort of worked our way back and eventually worked our way out to the northwestern part of the city, up around in the vicinity of Danhey Park. And then, worked our way back down, down toward Brattle Street and eventually back to the Cambridge Public Library, main library on Broadway, which is where the whole thing starts. Um, it's a good thing. And, if you're able, you really should, be aware of when these bike rides happen. They're really kind of fun. There were a little bit fewer people than have witnessed in past years. By the way, the spring events are usually very thematic. I've actually been a presenter on things like political history, transportation history, and several other the history of prohibition. Uh, you know, remember talking to a whole crowd of people down at Shady Hill Square about that some years ago. But anyway, they're really worthwhile. Even though I hadn't actually, I'm going to confess, I hadn't actually been on my bike in a year. And when I was, but still, I was riding up the front, and and I know a lot of the police officers, so I'm often just sort of, um, you know, uh, firing away with the police officers since I've known so many of them for so long. But it was quite interesting actually when you're riding alongside a police officer, and then a call comes in on those little radios there about there being a traffic altercation on Brattle Street just as we were heading toward Brattle Street. And it was interesting because, I think I've probably mentioned on this program before how I'm not a fan. I'm okay with a lot of the bike lanes and separated bike lanes, but some of the designs leave a lot to be desired. I think they're badly engineered. And I would say that in particular about what was done on Brattle Street, where the travel lanes are just too narrow and they have concrete curbstones in the middle of the roadway, not the middle of the roadway, but separating the bike lanes from the automobile travel lanes. But it's a little too narrow, and the reflective properties of those curbstones during certain times of the day in certain conditions is virtually non-existent. So you can go there anytime you wish, and you can see the sort of black scuff marks on the curbstones for where automobiles and trucks have hit the curbstones. So as luck would have it, here we are with this whole gang of bicyclists coming down, and we hear over the radio that a car has actually hit a curbstone and blown out a couple of tires. And when we get down there, sure enough, there were a couple of older people, just didn't gauge it right because it's just too narrow and difficult to see. And we had basically shot out at least one tire and was, straddling into anyway, it was the car had to be towed away and whatever. But when I was speaking to the police officers, they said, this is not an isolated incident. This has happened many times. So, I'm not just blowing steam here when I say that some of the engineering of these bike facilities is badly done. The fact of the matter is, cars have been and trucks have been hitting those stones. Um, And now when they were placed in New York City, I think they ended up removing some of them because cars went airborne. So I do think, bike safety ordinance notwithstanding, there is a place for taking a good hard look at some of the engineering that was done or not done, as the case may be here, to make it actually safer. And I have to say, one of the more pathetic things I overheard, as we're heading back, and is just this sort of kindly old couple there, not a bicyclist in sight, but it was just happened to clip the curbstone and lost some tires. The bicyclist rather arrogant, and somebody may remember the Cambridge Bicycle Committee, I believe, who was one of the leaders, just said, well, that just shows that they're functioning as intended. Now, come on, let's get serious here. Functioning as intended means providing safety for cyclists. It doesn't mean if an automobile strays an inch or two, out of a very narrow lane, that they should basically get in a wreck. That's not really related to whether bicyclists were in the lane or not. There's quite a buffer before you actually get to where bicyclists would be located. So anyway, I thought that was one of the more telling moments of the Cambridge Bicycle Committee's ride, was a graphic, real-time illustration of some of how things can go wrong. So there's probably more to say about the bike related stuff, especially since the city council, there was a fatality in the vicinity of the BU Bridge. A fellow named John Corcoran from Newton was killed along the Paul Dudley White bicycle path, which has basically been around for as long as I've been around the Boston area, in one of the more problematic sections, which is close to the BU Bridge. And I'll agree, it's always been a problematic section, and I could say more about it. In fact, maybe I'll say some more about it right now. When I used to commute over from between Boston University and where I live in mid-Cambridge, I would go over the BU Bridge just about every day on my bicycle. Sometimes I would drive if I could, cheat a parking space off on Ivy Street or whatever, but for the most part, it was via bike. And back then, the configuration close to where the BU Rotary is used to have a slip lane, what they call a slip lane. It's just a right turn only lane. So if you were riding on the sidewalk, which is what a lot of cyclists would do, heading toward Cambridge, when you got to this, like a blind turn, and there was a slip lane there and just a little pedestrian ramp, bicycles all the time were getting hit because they were, crossing on a blind turn where cars are approaching it almost like it was a highway exit ramp. Um, so I will tell you personally, after a while, I just said, I'm not doing that anymore. So I chose to ride in the roadway, in the main roadway, which, even though it's, just used to be 2 lanes toward Cambridge and 2 lanes away from Cambridge, that's since changed. But that I actually felt safer riding right in the right lane of the roadway heading toward Cambridge because I was visible. And when I approached the Rotary, cars would yield to me because they saw me. I was right there. I was not hidden at all. And again, lessons learned about what constitutes actual bicycle safety versus imagined bicycle safety, or perceptions of safety or comfort, which can actually be very deadly if you're not careful. Now, it was interesting, and I suppose we could talk about this more in a little bit here, but so the DCR, I still instinctively say the MDC, but it's the DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation. Actually, after this recent fatality, which is over by where the BU boathouse is, so it's not in the Rotary proper, but it's a place where there's a transition between an on-road piece and an off-road piece, and it's a little ambiguous. And I think everybody has agreed that that was the case. So in very unusual fashion, the DCR turned around and really within days or weeks came up with a plan, and they were actually already going ahead and doing some reconfiguration there to make things safer. Now that's actually part of a larger plan, or maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but there's also plans to reconfigure much of Memorial Drive. But earlier plans wanted to do lane reductions during much of the length of it, but I think they've realized that there may be problems with doing that, and that so they're going to. I'm pretty sure they will be reducing lanes west of JFK Street, and the Lars Anderson Bridge, going out toward the Elliott Bridge, which honestly has got far too much road for too little traffic. It's always been that way. So that makes total sense to do lane reductions out there. You might even convince me that some lane reductions east of JFK Street going toward the Western Avenue Bridge might also be warranted, especially if they put in turn lanes, dedicated turn lanes where it's helpful and appropriate. But honestly, anything east of that, where you have a lot of traffic coming to and fro onto the Mass Pike, like it or not, Memorial Drive is actually a pretty essential arterial roadway for a lot of that. And as many people have pointed out, if you restrict travel lanes, but you're not going to make people stop using automobiles, there's a very, very good chance that people will simply take alternative routes through neighborhoods. So there are people in Cambridgeport and Riverside in particular who have some real concerns about that. And when you factor in what's coming in, I'm not quite sure when they're going to put the shovels in the ground, but there's this whole big, I mean, really big, it's kind of exciting project about realignment of the Mass Pike over on the Alston side of the river. And during that time, there'll probably be traffic restrictions, which may divert significant amounts of traffic onto Memorial Drive. So in the next few years, it probably is kind of a ludicrous idea to think about doing lane reductions, unless you just hate automobiles and you're an ideologue and you've decided that car drivers are evil and they need to be inconvenienced as much as possible or just driven out of existence, right? But I think cooler heads have prevailed on that one. By the way, there was might as well mention it now. There was in the aftermath of the death of the gentleman near the BU Rotary, there was, as expected, you get city council orders calling for speed reductions. I think that's a good idea. Whether people obey them or not, that's another matter. And but also calls for things like lane reductions. And that actually turned into quite a controversial moment at the city council. I believe if it wasn't last week, it was the week before. I think it was actually last week because there was a charter right from an order the previous week where there are people, including Cathie Zusy, who's really represents, well, of course, all councilors represent the whole city, but they are all at-large councilors, but she comes from out of Cambridgeport. And there have been meetings in the past where people in Cambridgeport and Riverside have expressed great concerns about diversion of traffic into neighborhood streets. Certainly the controversy, yet another controversy on Memorial Drive about whether there should be Saturday and Sunday closures or so-called Riverbend Park, which turned into a big political brouhaha where people wanted to fault Marjorie Decker as somehow being singularly responsible for something which was ridiculous. Um, but anyway, there is concern about this. So when City Council order they tried to put in wording calling on the DCR to do lane reductions. Then I thought, well, okay, it's Cambridge, cycle safety ordinance and all of that. I figured, okay, that'll pass, right? Well, actually, it barely passed by the skin of its teeth. It passed on a 5-4 vote with, I think, Burhan Azim, Mark McGovern, Patty Nolan, Sumbul Siddiqui, and Jivan Sabrina Wheeler voting in favor. But even amongst them, there was some concern prior to the vote. And then Paul Toner, Aisha Wilson, Cathie Zusy, and Denise Simmons voting against it. So, I think some people feel that if you're going to send something to the state or the DCR, it should be like an 8-1 vote showing support. So I'm not quite sure what a 5-4 vote exactly is saying to them. Maybe maybe that's exactly what the DCR would expect, because they understand, just like some of the councils understand, that this is not a slam dunk decision. This is some, there's more than one side to this this issue, right? So anyway, I suppose I could say more about the whole Memorial Drive issue, but I think I'm going to sort of divert and change gears here for a little bit. Um, so I would like to now just sort of mention, just because it is now October 15th, the election is coming up in early November. What is it actually? November 5th. I don't have a whole lot to say about the presidential race, quite honestly. I could never vote for Donald Trump, but I'm not particularly enthralled with Kamala Harris either. So honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, just vote. Vote for her. Maybe, I don't know. Um, but anyway, one other thing that's going to be, in addition to the usual uncontested elections, which is typical for Massachusetts and very infuriating, there are ballot questions this year. So I'm just going to sort of bounce over here, talk a little bit about that. And, so the ballot questions, I don't know if that's as visible as it could be, but the maybe I'll grow it a little bit. So there's some ballot questions here. Question one, I'll just read them here. But should the state auditor oversee the legislature? Is kind of a um, a little oversimplification, but this is from whence I took it. Basically being able to audit. The legislature is one of the state legislature, House and Senate, as one of the bodies that are not subject to audits by the state auditor. Uh, but the current state auditor, I think it's what her name is, Ziglio. I probably got that wrong. Has been making that a real political issue ever since she even ran for the office. So now it's a ballot question saying, asking the people of the state, should the auditor have the authority to basically audit the legislature? I think it's an interesting concept. I can't say one way or another how I feel about it. Seems like, transparency and all that is a very good goal. I'm a little concerned maybe that, about one branch of government overstepping its authority as well. So it's kind of hard to say. So I'll leave it at that on that particular question. Um, by the way, over people at one of the centers at Tufts University have some really, these are little clickable links. I'm not going to do it though, where there's a lot of great detail on both sides of each of these arguments. Now, the second ballot question, which is about the MCAS graduation requirement, that was actually the subject of a city council order where three of the city councilors, I believe it was three, were advocating making that. I'm actually going to step out of this here for a moment just to speak about this. We're advocating that the city council should go on record supporting what's question two, which is eliminating the MCAS test as a graduation requirement. It doesn't eliminate the test. It just makes it so that it wouldn't really affect your ability to graduate or not. Now, that was actually quite interesting for me. I mean, I will tell you straight out, I'm opposed to that question two. To me, the notion about lowering standards is, as you say, some have said, it's the soft bigotry of lower expectations. And it was very interesting during that conversation at the city council where Councilor Toner actually quoted some statistics that had been provided from the interim superintendent of schools, that basically said, when people were, crying like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. It's very hard on minority representation and other groups, and probably is tougher on English as second language. I think that's an issue worth looking into. And, and for people with certain learning disabilities. So I hope those things be resolved. But as a general rule, I think MCAS is a very good thing and with a very good track record. But Paul Toner quoted, said that over the last 10 years at Cambridge Ridge Latin High School, There have been 5,352 graduations, and only 41 um, did not receive a diploma due to failure to pass the 10th grade MCAS exam. So, and I thought, well, okay, it's Cambridge is Cambridge. It's just gonna go through. It'll be voted, right? And it'll pass. Well, it didn't. It actually ended up in a deadlock. It was Mark McGovern, Sumbul Siddiqui, Jivan Sabrina Wheeler, and Aisha Wilson voting in favor of endorsing the ballot question, but Burhan Azim, Patty Nolan, Paul Toner, Cathie Zusy voted flat out no. And Denise Simmons, the mayor, who is chair of the school committee, and it is reported that there is a divided, there are different opinions on the school committee. So she was not going to, as representing the school committee, take a position. So she voted present. So it died on a 4-1 vote. So I thought it was quite interesting. All right, well, I'm going to just take my artificial break here right now, just so I can split this into two programs. And then I'll be back in a couple seconds, really, on Cambridge Inside Out.